What happens to a person when they stop being a person? The zombie film has been asking that question since 1968, and the fact that the question still has no comfortable answer is precisely why the genre refuses to go away. The zombie is not just a monster, it is a mirror, reflecting the mob, the consumer, the soldier who follows orders, the city that swallows individuals whole. Hi, this is Movie Blanket Club. Today we are counting down the top 20 best zombie movies of all time. From the film that invented the genre to the films that reinvented it, from pure survival horror to social satire sharp enough to draw blood, these are the works that prove the zombie is cinema's most politically honest monster. A warning: by the end of this list, you may find yourself looking at a crowd rather differently. 20. Land of the Dead, 2005. George Romero's fourth entry in his Dead series arrives 2 decades after Day of the Dead and finds the director still with things to say, specifically about class, about fortified wealth, and about what happens when the poor eventually stop being afraid of the walls built to keep them out. The film is set in a city where the living rich occupy a luxury skyscraper called Fiddler's Green, while the rest of humanity scrapes by outside. And the zombies, who have begun slowly to organize under a leader named Big Daddy, are massing to reclaim what was taken from them. Dennis Hopper plays the plutocrat running the tower with a cheerful contempt that reads as a self-portrait of a certain kind of power. John Leguizamo plays a mercenary who supplies the tower with food and begins to notice the arrangement is unjust. Romero's not being subtle. He never was. Land of the Dead is an imperfect film. The action sequences are functional rather than inspired, and the horror is diluted by the political allegory rather than sharpened by it. But it is made by a director who still believes the genre owes the audience an argument. That alone distinguishes it. 19. The Return of the Living Dead, 1985. Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, decided the best follow-up was a punk rock zombie comedy, and the resulting film is one of the most gleefully anarchic entries the genre has produced. The story begins when a worker at a medical supply warehouse accidentally releases a gas from a military canister, which reanimates the dead in the nearby cemetery. The zombies in this film can run, they can talk, and, in the innovation that every subsequent zombie narrative has had to contend with, they specifically want brains. The film is set partly in a cemetery where a group of punk teenagers happen to be partying, and it uses this setup for a combination of genuine dread and very dark comedy that works better than it has any right to. O'Bannon understood that horror and humor operate on the same neurological frequency. Both require surprise and the violation of expectation. The film is also surprisingly honest about the competence of its characters. Every plan fails, every authority figure makes things worse, and the ending refuses to offer rescue. The Return of the Living Dead is not trying to be Romero. It is trying to be its own strange, loud, neon-lit thing. It completely succeeds. 18. One Cut of the Dead, 2017. Here's what you need to know about this Japanese film before you watch it. The first 37 minutes will test your patience, and you should not stop watching. Director Shinichiro Ueda made this film for roughly $25,000 with a cast of largely unknown actors, and it went on to gross over $30 million worldwide, one of the most extraordinary returns on investment in cinema history. The premise appears simple: a zombie film being shot in an abandoned water purification facility is interrupted by an actual zombie outbreak. What the film does with that premise, structurally, is something that cannot be described without spoiling it, and you should not be spoiled. What can be said is that One Cut of the Dead is genuinely funny, genuinely moving, and a love letter to the act of filmmaking that works as an argument for why low-budget creative collaboration produces things money cannot buy. It is the most purely joyful film on this list. Every choice that seems like a mistake in the first half is a deliberate setup for the second. Approach it with patience and no foreknowledge, and it will reward you completely. 17. Zombie 2, 1979. Lucio Fulci's Italian zombie film was released in Europe as a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, without Romero's involvement, without his permission, and without any actual connection to that film beyond the shared genre. The audacity of that decision is almost admirable. Set partly in New York and partly on a Caribbean island, the film follows the investigation into a ghost ship found drifting in the harbor with a zombie on board. What follows prioritizes atmosphere and carnage over narrative coherence, which is either a significant flaw or the entire point depending on your relationship with Italian horror cinema of this era. The film is best known for two sequences: a wooden splinter driven slowly into a human eyeball, and an underwater confrontation between a zombie and a live shark, filmed with an actual shark, and one of the most inexplicable things ever committed to film. Zombie 2 is not a great film by any conventional critical measure. Its plot exists largely to move characters between locations, where Fulci can stage the next set piece. It is, however, a film completely committed to being exactly what it is. In a genre this crowded, that kind of single-minded conviction counts for something. 16. Warm Bodies, 2013. Jonathan Levine's zombie romantic comedy should not work, and the fact that it does is largely down to Nicholas Hoult, who plays R, a zombie who cannot remember his name and narrates his internal monologue with a dry, melancholy humor that carries the entire film. R falls in love with a human survivor named Julie, played by Teresa Palmer, after eating her boyfriend's brain and absorbing his memories of her. This is not a premise that invites serious analysis. What Levine does with it is take the Shakespearean structure. The Romeo and Juliet scaffolding is explicit, down to the character names, and use the zombie's gradual return to humanity as a genuine emotional arc, rather than simply a comedic one. The film has real structural problems in its second act, and its villains are considerably less interesting than its protagonist. But Warm Bodies earns its place on this list because it treats the zombie as a figure of genuine pathos, rather than pure threat, and it does so with enough craft that the sentiment lands. The film is also quietly an argument that connection, any connection, however implausible, is what separates the living from the dead. That is a harder point to make than it sounds. 15. The Girl with All the Gifts, 2016. Colin McCarthy's British film is built around a genuinely interesting science fiction premise. A fungal infection has created a generation of children who carry the pathogen without being fully consumed by it. Children who are intelligent, emotionally developed, and also capable, under the wrong stimulus, of tearing an adult apart in seconds. Melanie, played by Senia Nanua, in a performance of remarkable precision for an actor of any age, is the most developed of these children. A 10-year-old who loves learning, who loves her teacher, Miss Justineau, played by Gemma Arterton, and who is being studied by Dr. Caldwell, played by Glenn Close, who sees her as a potential cure rather than a person. The film is a slow burn, and it divides audiences on whether its pacing is patience rewarded or momentum lost. Both responses are fair. The ending refuses comfort in a way that is genuinely brave. The Girl with All the Gifts understands that the zombie story is ultimately a story about succession, about what inherits the earth when humanity has finished consuming it. It answers that question with honesty rather than hope. 14. 28. Weeks Later, 2007. Juan Carlos Fresnadillo's sequel to 28 Days Later has a structural problem the film is surprisingly honest about. Its first 15 minutes are the best thing in it, and the rest of the film is very good without quite reaching that height again. The opening sequence, Robert Carlyle as Don, a survivor hiding in a farmhouse, forced to make an impossible choice when the infected arrive, is one of the most efficiently devastating opening acts in modern horror. What follows is the story of an American-led repopulation of Britain 6 months after the rage virus, complicated by the discovery that the virus is not as contained as anyone hoped. Fresnadillo directs the action sequences with a visual aggression that occasionally tips into illegibility, a legitimate criticism. But 28 weeks later's real subject is moral cowardice and its consequences. What Don does in those opening minutes casts a shadow over everything that follows and gives the film a moral weight that sequels rarely bother to earn. Rose Byrne and Jeremy Renner do solid work in the middle sections. The helicopter sequence alone justifies the film's existence. 13. Army of Darkness, 1992. Sam Raimi's third Evil Dead film is less a horror film than a comedy built on horror infrastructure, and it commits to that identity completely. Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell in what may be the most purely entertaining performance in the genre, is sucked back in time to medieval England and must retrieve the Necronomicon to return home, while fighting an army of skeletal undead and dealing with a tiny evil version of himself that hatches from a mirror. The film's relationship to the zombie genre is loose. The Deadites are demonic rather than viral. But Army of Darkness earns its place through sheer force of personality. The quotable dialogue, the slapstick medieval combat, the windmill sequence that contains more physical comedy per minute than most actual comedies, all of it is executed with a craft the lo-fi aesthetic deliberately obscures. Campbell understood Ash as a figure of absurd competence, masking genuine terror. And that tension is what makes the comedy land. This is a film Raimi made because he wanted to, in exactly the way he wanted to, without compromising the vision downward to seriousness or upward to polish. The result is irreplaceable. 12. Dead Alive, 1992. Before Peter Jackson made the Lord of the Rings trilogy, before he became the most powerful director in Hollywood, he made this, a New Zealand splatter film about a mama's boy whose overbearing mother is bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey and begins turning into a zombie. Dead Alive, known as Brain Dead in some territories, holds a reasonable claim to being the goriest film ever made. The final 15 minutes, set in a living room filling rapidly with the undead, with the protagonist armed with a lawnmower, is so excessive in its carnage that it wraps past horror and becomes something closer to absurdist comedy. The film is also, beneath the viscera, a surprisingly pointed satire on maternal control and the damage it does to adult children who cannot escape it. Lionel, the protagonist, is a man so conditioned to obey his mother that he continues enabling her even after she becomes something monstrous, which the film recognizes as a very specific kind of horror that precedes the supernatural kind. Jackson was 29 when he directed this. The technical ambition required to execute practical effects at this scale and speed is genuinely impressive. Dead Alive is not for the squeamish. It is very much for everyone else. 11. World War Z, 2013. The production of this film is almost more interesting than the film itself. Principal photography overran massively. The entire third act was scrapped and rewritten during post-production, and the budget reportedly reached $270 million. What emerged from that chaos is a significantly better film than it has any right to be. Brad Pitt plays a former UN investigator pulled back into service when a zombie outbreak of extraordinary speed goes global, and the film's scale, cities collapsing in real time, the Jerusalem sequence that remains the genre's most visually audacious set piece, distinguishes it from everything else on this list. The PG-13 rating neuters. What should be visceral horror, Pitt's character is too competent to generate sustained tension, and the ending feels rushed against the ambition of everything preceding it. These are fair criticisms. World War Z is the only film on this list that successfully depicts genuine global collapse in real time, and the Jerusalem sequence, tens of thousands of the infected forming a living pyramid against the city walls, is simply extraordinary filmmaking, whatever surrounds it. 10. REC, 2007. We have reached the top 10, and the best found footage horror film ever made earns its place here without argument. Jaume Balagueró and Paco Plaza's Spanish film achieves something the format rarely manages. It uses its formal constraint, a single camera, a single location, events unfolding in something close to real time, not as a gimmick, but as a genuine mechanism for dread. A television reporter named Angela, played by Manuela Velasco, and her cameraman cover a routine night shift at a fire station and are called to an apartment building. The building is then sealed from the outside. What follows accelerates from confused to terrifying with the precision of filmmakers who understand exactly how much information to give the audience and exactly when. The infected move fast and hit hard, and the spatial logic of the building, narrow corridors, dark stairwells, the top floor, is exploited with the intelligence of a thriller. The final minutes, set in near total darkness in a penthouse apartment, are as frightening as anything this genre has produced. REC spawned 3 sequels and an American remake. None of them come close. 9. Dawn of the Dead, 2004. Zack Snyder's remake of Romero's 1978 classic dispenses with the original's satirical framework entirely. There's no commentary on consumerism here, no lingering irony about survival inside a shopping mall. What replaces it is a relentless, expertly constructed piece of survival horror that opens with one of the best first acts in the genre. The sequence that begins the film, a nurse named Anna, played by Sarah Polley, waking to find her neighborhood collapsing in real time, is filmed with a disorienting speed and matter-of-factness that sets a tone the film sustains through most of its running time. The fast zombies were controversial among purists, and the debate is legitimate. There is something philosophically important about the slowness of Romero's Undead that Snyder abandons for kineticism. But speed generates its own particular dread, and the film uses it well. Ving Rhames anchors the ensemble with the right combination of authority and weariness. Dawn of the Dead. 2004 is the rare remake that fails to surpass its source, while still fully justifying its own existence. The boat ending is one of the most honest in the genre. 8. I Am Legend, 2007. Richard Matheson's 1954 novel has been adapted 3 times, and this version, with Will Smith as the apparent sole survivor Robert Neville, alone in an empty New York City, most fully realizes the isolation at the novel's core. The film's best sequences are those set during the day, as Neville moves through a Manhattan reclaimed by nature, running experiments, maintaining routine, talking to mannequins he has arranged in a video store to simulate human presence. The mannequin sequence, in which his grip on reality becomes impossible to locate, is the film's emotional peak, and Smith carries it with a precision the rest of the film does not always deserve. The Darkseekers are realized through CGI that was dated on release and has aged considerably since, a significant problem for a film that depends on them as a threat. The theatrical ending diverges from the novel's most devastating idea in a way that fatally softens the source material. The film is best understood as 2 exceptional acts in search of a worthy third. What those first 2 acts achieve, with Smith alone on screen, is genuinely rare. 7. Day of the Dead, 1985. George Romero's third Dead film is his most pessimistic, a claustrophobic, furious argument that humanity will tear itself apart from the inside long before the undead finish it off from outside. Set entirely in an underground bunker where scientists and soldiers have retreated, the film is structured around the deteriorating relationship between the military faction, led by the genuinely frightening Captain Rhodes, played by Joseph Pilato, and the scientists trying to find a cure. The reduced budget that Romero was forced to accept becomes a structural virtue. The confinement generates its own dread. The film's most surprising element is Bub, a zombie who has been partially domesticated through conditioning, and who becomes, in Romero's hands, the film's most sympathetic character. That a zombie achieves more emotional resonance than most of the living humans is the point and the provocation. Day of the Dead arrived to mixed reviews in 1985 and has been steadily reassessed ever since. It is now understood as the darkest and most formally consistent entry in Romero's trilogy, a film that refuses the consolation of survival as victory. 6. Zombieland, 2009. Ruben Fleischer's zombie comedy road trip is the most purely enjoyable film on this list, which is not a backhanded compliment, because pure enjoyment is considerably harder to engineer than pure dread. Columbus, played by Jesse Eisenberg, is a socially anxious college student who has survived the zombie apocalypse by following a set of personal rules: double tap, cardio, beware of bathrooms, that the film presents as on-screen text in a device that should be irritating and instead becomes the film's comic engine. Woody Harrelson plays Tallahassee, a man who has directed all of his considerable energy toward finding a Twinkie and killing zombies, preferably simultaneously. The chemistry between Eisenberg and Harrelson works because they are playing the same loneliness in completely different registers. Emma Stone and Abigail Breslin provide the plot and the emotional stakes. The Bill Murray cameo provides one of the most unexpected comic sequences of the decade, and the amusement park finale is as cathartic as it is ridiculous. Zombieland understands the relationship between grief and laughter, that the apocalypse gives people permission to stop pretending they were fine before it started. 5. Train to Busan 2016. Yeon Sang-ho's Korean film does two things simultaneously, and does both better than most films manage either one separately. It is, technically, a virtuoso piece of action horror. The confined space of a high-speed train used to generate escalating tension with the spatial intelligence of a thriller, the infected moving through carriages in waves that the survivors must navigate with decreasing options. It is also a film about a father who has failed his daughter and uses the apocalypse to become the person she deserved. Gong Yoo plays Seok Woo, a fund manager whose dedication to work has made him a stranger to his own child. Suan Kim plays his daughter Suan, and the film earns its emotional finale entirely through what these two actors build between the action sequences. Train to Busan is frequently cited as class critique. The film is explicit about who survives and why, and the answer rhymes with Parasite. But it works first and foremost as a film about what a parent owes a child, told with the honesty to follow that question wherever it leads. The ending earns everything it asks of you. 4. Shaun of the Dead, 2004. Edgar Wright's British zombie comedy is the only film on this list that functions simultaneously as a loving deconstruction of its genre and as one of the finest examples of it. The premise is immediately familiar. A zombie outbreak begins in suburban London, and Shaun, played by Simon Pegg, who co-wrote the script with Wright, must use the planning skills he has never previously demonstrated to survive. What Wright understands, and what distinguishes this from other horror comedies, is that the comedy and the horror must share structural DNA, the same rhythms, the same surprise, the same escalating stakes, or one will undermine the other. Shaun of the Dead never lets them separate. The film is also a story about growing up. Shaun is a 30-year-old child, and the apocalypse is the event that forces him to take responsibility for the people he loves. Nick Frost, as Ed, provides the film's most consistent laughs and its most quietly devastating emotional beat. The Winchester sequence, Shaun and Ed playing video games in the pub while the world ends outside, is among the finest things Wright has ever directed, which is saying something significant. 3. 28 Days Later, 2002. Danny Boyle's film did not invent the fast zombie, but it convinced the world that it had, and the distinction matters less than the result. 28 Days Later reinvented the genre for the 21st century, and every zombie film made after 2002 exists in its shadow. Cillian Murphy plays Jim, a bicycle courier who wakes from a coma 28 days into a virus that has consumed the United Kingdom, and the sequences in which he walks through a completely empty London, shot on digital video on early Sunday mornings before the city woke, remain among the most striking images modern British cinema has produced. The film's genius is its refusal to deliver the horror movie it appears to be setting up. The infected are almost incidental. The real threat arrives in the third act with Christopher Eccleston's Major West, and the film's most disturbing claim that the people who survive catastrophe may be more dangerous than the catastrophe itself, lands with the force of a genuine argument. Naomi Harris as Selena is the film's moral compass and its most compelling character. 28 Days Later gave the zombie film its politics back. 2. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George Romero made this film in Pittsburgh for $114,000, and in doing so, invented the modern zombie as a cultural object. Everything that follows on this list, everything that follows in the entire genre, flows from a farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania and the question of what a group of strangers will do when the dead begin to walk. The film is shot in black and white, and the low budget is visible throughout. It does not matter. What Romero understood instinctively was that the zombie is not the primary threat. The threat is the living room, the argument in the farmhouse basement, the decisions made by people who cannot agree on a plan while something terrible arrives outside. Dwayne Jones plays Ben, the film's most competent and rational character, and the decision to cast a black actor in that role in 1968 was not accidental. The film's final minutes deliver one of the bleakest endings in American cinema, and the fact that Romero denied political intent does not make the film less political. Night of the Living Dead is the foundation stone. Everything else is built on it. 1. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. George Romero's sequel is the film that proved the zombie genre was capable of genuine social satire, and it remains the most thematically complete work in the field. 4 survivors, 2 SWAT officers, a television technician, and her partner, take refuge in an enormous shopping mall in rural Pennsylvania, where the undead congregate out of habit, drawn by the memory of what the space once meant to them. The symbolism is not subtle, and Romero did not intend it to be. The film is explicit. The mall, with its abundance and its hollow commerce, attracts both the living and the dead, and the living are not obviously better served by it. The survivors build a comfortable life inside the mall, and the film takes time to show that comfort corroding something in them. The normalization of the extraordinary, the small deaths that precede the large ones. Tom Savini's practical effects remain extraordinary. The biker gang that arrives to strip the mall is both menacing and, in context, correct. Dawn of the Dead is a film about what people do when they have everything they need and nothing worth doing. The zombie outside is the smaller problem. It always was. And there you have it, the top 20 best zombie movies of all time. From Dan O'Bannon's Punk Anarchists and Romero's Shopping Mall to the fever dream dread of 28 Days Later and the father-daughter grief of Train to Busan. What the best films in this genre have always understood is that the real horror is never the dead. It is what the living are willing to do to each other once the rules disappear. This is Movie Blanket Club. Tell us in the comments which entry deserves to be higher and which one we got completely wrong. We read everyone.